Right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Alex Luckow. Am I saying that right? Is it Luckow or is it something? Did I do it right the
It's
first
actually
time?
it's Luckow.
Luckow. Wow, holy. Okay, I
Yeah,
have a tendency to
it's
do this with my guests. It's like this is a great start. Cool,
not.
awesome.
It's a bit weird. Like if you look at it, you'd think it's Luckow.
Yeah, well, it works. So Alex is an 82.5 kilo lifter in the US APL, and has gotten a little more into coaching and wanted to get him on to sort of pick his brain, but he's freakishly strong. His best lifts are a 287 slash 330 633 squat, 187 and a half slash 413 bench, and then a 335 slash 738 deadlift. But he has hit like 750 in training, but meet day do be like that sometimes.
Yeah,
How
my
long have you been?
best.
Oh, good. Go ahead.
I hit 770.
Oh shit.
Yeah, I hit a 756 at Nats too. I just kind of took a big YOLO jump at Arnold.
Gotcha. So, like, in regards to like to that actually like with like meat selection strategy, I know that like this kind of goes into like weekly weight progression strategies, but like I know like Marcellus has a little bit like a different approach to his attempt selections that like they kind of follow like similar like jumps that you make in training, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much just like touching as little as you can while still getting the needed stimulus. Like gauge out how much you can lift.
hmm So, like in regards to that, do you find you have to be like a little bit lighter in that second attempt to like sort of still have gas for that third, or do you like going a little bit heavier?
So yeah, it's finding that fine balance. So I think actually for my past meet, I'm just talking about personal experience. My second was probably a tad heavy. Um, so I did like a 17 kilo jump for my second, which isn't crazy big. Um, yeah, I think I actually went a tad heavy on my second attempt and it kind of gassed me. I think my third attempt was just a little bit out of range as well.
hmm Yeah,
So
I've always kind of found that like an interesting thing with like just kind of figuring out like how heavy you need to go on a second attempt to like actually gauge where you're at, challenge your position enough, and then still have enough gas in the tank, to actually go heavy on that third, and not like overshoot too, because like if it's too light, you're like, I think I'll just YOLO this and see like what I have. Um,
yeah, that's something I've messed up on in the gym before. Is like the first time I attempted 771, I did 661 before it, and I jumped straight to 771. And especially with pulling sumo, I think the last one up just wasn't enough.
yeah,
So I
especially as like
found
you
out,
have to be much more patient off the floor with like the heavier weights.
yeah. So I found out if I want to touch close to like 750 plus, I probably have to touch at least 700 once on the day on my last warm up. And
Yeah.
that's something we actually talked about to see because I do such big jumps in training and I go to meet days and it's sometimes weird taking like three heavier attempts. Because he's like, Izzy told me recently is to actually kind of simulate what you're gonna do in a meet in training,
That's something that
just to
I
give me.
actually like tell my lifters. Is like I like seeing weekly jumps that are similar to like an attempt selection strategy. Like if I also do like SBD days, I typically do them like I don't do them often for my clients, but I like doing like ascending sets where it's kind of like it like sort of like replicates that like the three sets of each lift going up to it and then dropping that back down. But you have obviously seen a lot of success, and I've you coach my friend Caleb, and he's told me that had a lot of success with like making larger weekly weight jumps, on the order of, like five kilos. Like one of his blocks was like 585, 633, 666, and 716 on deadlift, like doubles for like a block, for example. I know you made similar, pretty large jumps in between, your week one, your final week of the block. How did you sort of fall upon that approach? Because that's pretty unique.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely from Marcellus, definitely from Kraft. So I think he started doing that mainly with like Ashton at first. Then he started doing it with Bob, and then he started implementing it a lot of with his. I wouldn't call say weaker lifters, but like typically lifters who don't do that. Like I'm at 82.5. Typically in the lighter weight classes, people won't do that, or else they'll feel detrained. But I would say probably I was one of the first, not one of the first, um, but an example of a lighter weight class lifter that it works with. And then he actually applies it to um, lifters who aren't necessarily like elite. Like he has some lifters. Well, he has a lot of lifters. I don't know if people know is like probably over half his roster is lifters who aren't elite. Um, but he applied it to like lifters who have like a 400 dots, and it still worked really, really well for them.
So in regards to like finding that, like a good balance between like not detraining and also going heavy enough throughout the block where you can set yourself up for that week 4 because that last week is like really the only week that really, I guess like fully matters in the sense of like gauging block success or not. Um, how do you like sort of plan backwards?
Yeah, so just go to the last week. Of course, it depends on how training momentum's going. But if training momentum's going good, go to the last week. I usually like to set myself up for a small PR, and then just work my way backwards. I mean, I have so much data for myself. If I'm talking about my own training, where I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a lot easier for myself compared to coaching someone new. But for coaching someone new, go to the last week, um, set out like a realistic end goal, and then work my way backwards. For a lot of my newer athletes, I don't have weight ranges quite yet, just for like the first like 2 or 3 months, just because they're still kind of I'm still kind of like gauging out their strength and figuring out their progression. So I let them auto regulate a bit. And then maybe after like the third or the fourth block, I'll start implementing some ranges just based on progression rates. I think we're going to work best.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I've also noticed like because like for me, just talking personally, like I noticed on my week 1s and week 2s, like I feel bad enough that those lighter weights actually feel decently heavy still. Um, and I think that that's a big factor people need to consider is that, so I know that you're like quote unquote a lighter weight class lifter, but because you are lifting such large absolute loads, it's more fatiguing rep per rep. And this is also why you typically will find people who are stronger usually have lower average intensities because they just can't operate at those as high of absolute loads. That's what I've sort of found. But I know that you've mentioned like some of your stories, like you like legitimately feel that bad, where like it still feels like
Yeah.
relatively heavy, like on that week 1 and week 2. I think that's important for people to realize is that it's really just you auto regulating based off of what your body's giving you. And like what you said, you kind of need to learn how to trust that and not really flinch because like for example, like I have a very like weird response to training where like week 1 sucks and the week 2 actually feels a little bit worse. Then I get exponentially better after that. And like it was kind of like really frustrating first looking at that. I'm like, why is this happening? Like, why does I feel worse? And then like it just kind of happened over and over again. And I could just trust those trends. Like I make a really small jump from me week 1 to week 2, and I make bigger jumps from week 3 to week 4.
That's actually pretty similar for me. Because what typically happens is I'll actually start at the week 4. Typically on the week 4, I feel pretty great. And then I go into the week 1, and then the weight is just so light that even if I am, or well, by the time I get to the week 1, I'm fatigued. Um, but I'm not detrained. I'm still used to heavy weight, but the weight's just so light that it moves well. And then by the time I get to the week 2, now it's another light week. Body's still a little bit fatigued, but the weight's heavier. So then I'm detrained on the week 2, and my week 2s feel horrible. That's where like if I go in training, and maybe I'm hitting a little bit heavier than the week, well, a lot heavier than the week. I'm probably like 50 pounds on squat and deadlift. That's where I can start to get in my head. But then I realize like, oh, like the past 24 blocks, my week 2s have felt like this. And I've PR'd most of the time on the week 4. So it's not the end of the world. And that's something I've noticed pretty consistent with my lifters, at least the ones that are on 4 week blocks and the ones that are pretty strong. If they go into a week 2, the weight just feels a little bit heavy on their back, maybe heavy off the ground, heavy in their hands. I tell them not to freak out because it's pretty common.
Yeah, I think it's it's kind of like I like what you said, how it's so light, you kind of detrain a little bit from that, but that's sort of necessary in like a certain extent to like actually buy yourself some more training time. I think that's also interesting concept, when we talk about like that week 4 being like the highest level of like fitness. And like I know there are 2 ways of like peaking. I've implemented both of them with my lifters where like say I know a lifter is strongest on their week 4, maybe I try to just line up their beat with that week 4. Or other times I will just say like I know they get like a pretty big boost out of that. Actually, if they keep them at that week 4 intensity, they hit like an RP 8 or something like that, and then I just taper down the volume a little bit, and they come in even stronger on that, where their week one might be because they're just doing less volume in general. Have you sort of found a similar thing with yourself where like you feel, I guess, do you feel like you feel better personally when you go into meets and like that sort of like ramping strategy, like you say your week four is like your meet week and you just taper on that, or do you like sort of like getting a little bit more like fatigued going into that taper?
No, I like doing it where it lands on the fourth week. Um, because the way I program is typically a lot of the primaries are at the beginning of the week, and I even line them up on like the weekend. Um, so I like to just do like their typical week three lifts, then taper back a little bit on the week three. Their meet lands on the week four. Because we can get that to consistently show up in training. Um, then there's no reason it's not going to show up on the meet day.
Mm-hmm. So when you say like pull back on week three, you're saying like you're pulling back volume slightly going into that heaviest week.
Pretty much volume and accessories. The intensity is going to stay up for the most part. It's not really going to dip, but just a slight dip on volume and accessories because I don't program super aggressive to begin with, especially like if you want to use like Caleb or Yaya, like one of my stronger lifters as an example. Actually, with Yaya, I did a more typical peak, but that's just because of data he had before coming to me. He tried the building method with his previous coach and it didn't go the best. Granted, he did the building method a little bit different than I would do it. But just due to previous data, he wanted to just do more of a standard taper and peak, and that worked well. Or peak and taper, excuse me.
So it'll just like I guess so like a week three you do that volume deload and then you keep their intensity and volume like the same in their week fours. Like it's essentially it's their highest stress week on like week four, but you like do like the volume reduction like the week before is to raise up the fitness a little bit.
Yeah, just to get him feeling a little bit better.
Yeah,
Just to
no,
feel
no,
get,
that makes a lot of sense. It's like it's kind of weird. It's like I feel like with my coach, as I'm coached by Eric Bodhorn, we do this really unique kind of 2 week deload strategy where my week fours, I consistently, I go heavy, but then we do lower down my accessories by like one, my back down sets because I just get so blasted. I'm very like intensity sensitive. Like, I can handle a ton of some max volume, just soak it up, but intensity, like if I hit like a nine, I feel pretty wrecked for like it's like a deadlift like a good 3 weeks. Like I can still get it, but I don't feel like myself again. And then on my week one, we do like the RP like 5 6 stuff on that week one. So it's kind of like I get like that 2 week deload. Um, so I'm always
yeah,
like kind of like used to that, and that's why I think that like for me like that 4 week block and then taper on that fifth week works really well because like my body is kind of used to what that flow feels like. It kind of just about establishing that predictability and training. Like what you said, I think that peaking is like one of the most tricky concepts in powerlifting because like it changes as you get stronger. It changes depending on how you feel going into the meet. And I know that lots of times, back in like even like 2019, like people really had this idea of super compensation of like I'm going to be just super direct,
yeah,
like fatigue. I mean, missing like my second attempt, and in training, I'm just going to come in and smoke, like 40 kilos more on the platform, and it's like it doesn't really work like that. Like if you are coaching well, in my opinion, like I mean, deadlift is like the only exception, but like usually you're going to say like 1 to 3% better on the
yeah,
platform.
yeah. And typically those two do like peak, are either people who are undertraining or overtraining. Where they just go so easy all the time that the meet day is the only time they push it, or they do more of the super compensation to where their body's just so beat up all the time that they go into meet day and they finally feel fresh for months.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. But the tricky thing about that though is that like you either get it right or you totally miss
yeah,
your peak and you're just really weak, or because like there's only a very small like window for like each of the lists where like you're going to be the strongest. I know Matt Yuri's talked about how he like would much rather have a lifter feel fresh on the day than kind of like beat up. But it's also kind of interesting though because we've always had those sessions where we PR and you don't feel the best, you're just really strong. So again, it's just about establishing like that predictability, not like relying on like a super peak. Like I always say, this is what training is like indicating, and like my peak is like 1% above that for my
yeah,
lifters.
yeah. I typically right around gym numbers and just depending looking at what they've hit. Um, like Caleb, he hit that 716, 325 in the gym. Um, I think it'd be pretty reasonable for him to hit a little bit more than that on the day, especially just looking at everything. He's not cutting. He typically, I mean, if you want to call it peaks, like once you pull away some of the volume and accessories, he feels pretty good. So that'd be pretty reasonable for him to hit more. But
Mhm.
like myself, as an example, I typically hit less because I'm usually cutting a little bit. I don't want to push it. Well, I usually hit heavy third. My like third squats are grinders and meets, but I don't want to push it too hard. So I usually hit a little bit less.
Yeah, wait, and there's all, this is, talking about like weight cutting, that's a big one that impacts it. Like, you're probably not going to get much of a peak if you're deciding to cut weight. But if you want to actually get a peak, you probably don't
Yeah,
want to
I
cut.
almost I almost say it's almost like a weight cut and a peak kind of cancel each other out, and you just feel normal.
That's a great way to look at it. Is that last meet where I did like going into it, like if I didn't cut, I probably could have gotten like 5 to 7.5 more kilos on my squat and on my deadlift at the same RPE and another 2.5 on my bench. But because I chose to cut, I just I didn't get that. I think there's always like thresholds of like what you can cut. For example, like a 2 hour weigh-in. I think like if you're just doing like a gut cut, I don't think that really affects it that much.
Yeah.
But if you're doing like a 24-hour weigh-in, like you can get away with like even like 5%. And like you're not really going to notice too much of a difference in my personal experience. Once you get above that, though, it's like yeah, you're just trading off strength, and I think that's one of a good thing to like actually like discuss because like you're at this point, Lucky, where you are really strong. You're one of the best 82.5 kilo lifters in America, and um, when you go into meets, how do you sort of like approach that progression, like meet to meet, and your approach to like what you think that you have and like the mindset of an elite lifter because like it gets more stressful the more you're in that limelight and the more like you're expected to be really strong. Like how have you dealt with that over time?
Like, what do you mean, like meet to meet and like what numbers I'm going to approach or what?
Yeah, like numbers and then
Okay.
like planning on like that, like how you execute on the platform. Like because I think it's always really curious like seeing like how different people approach meet day.
Okay. Yeah, I've talked about this a little bit before. But I don't like to get too attached to training numbers. I think that's a problem a lot of people have is maybe they'll do training, and I think training numbers can be a really good indication. Don't get me wrong. But maybe they'll squat like I don't know, I'll just use a random example, like 200 kilograms in training, and their previous meet best squat, let's say it's like something like 175 kilograms, and they go into a meet and they don't want to take anything less than 200 kg on squat. But it's like even if you take 195 kg, that's a 20 kilogram meet PR. That's the most you've hit like under those circumstances with refs, with the weight cut, whatever. Um, so I don't really like to always get super attached to gym numbers. If I can go in there and beat my previous meet best, that's what I'm trying to do. Uh, and sometimes just taking less on the day to secure hitting an attempt. Because as a competitor, I've never missed like a squat or a bench. I'm really good on the day with just gauging out what I have. Even if like my second's a little bit heavy, if it's a little bit off, I know I can fix it. Or I know if I can't fix it, if I just take a little bit less.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned, having that objectivity and understanding you're in a completely different circumstance. It's like I've had those times too. I'm like, well, I should be able to hit this, but it's like, if your body is telling you no, you gotta work with that. And especially for somebody who, like the whole goal, in my opinion, should be 6 for 6, like what, on
Yeah,
squat and bench press, and then you can duke it out on deadlift. But
yeah,
that's sort of my approach with my lifters. Like I like one meet where my squat didn't really peak that much and like I was expecting like I was like, oh, I should have like 5 more kilos, but like I took my second time, I was like, this is a very average day. And so I just took
yeah,
like what I knew that I had, and like that would felt so much better than missing lift because like I feel like especially as you get more advanced and you train with RP, like what you have, and you kind of feel dumb if you call something more than that.
yeah. Especially missing a third squat in a meet. I mean, it happens. Just gets the morale down for the day. Like you can easily spiral downwards from there. So it's
Yeah,
like just take a little bit less, get the lift, keep it going.
yeah.
Because
So I
like
think one,
the best case scenario is like if someone hits a third squat and they smoke it, it's so much better than missing a third squat.
oh yeah. It's like, oh no, like that was, it's maybe it's like something technically you got much more amp. Like that's actually like a big thing. With like performance is like how much hype you're using. Because like I
Yeah.
train with like very little like psychological like arousal until like that last week of training. And actually, I guess this is more on like this is a better question. Like, how do you periodize that psychological effort like on the platform? Because I think that sometimes like I've gotten this mindset too, where like sometimes that second attempt feels heavier just because like, I wasn't as focused as I should have been. But I knew that was the
I know
case.
exactly what you mean. Sometimes in like training, it's almost like the last warm up is heavier than the top
Yeah.
set. Well, not heavier, but it's it's almost like the last warm up's like more not more mentally draining, but because that's the one that I'm gonna gauge my strength off is that last warm up. The top set I'm just gonna lift. Um, so it's almost like the second attempts are sometimes more nerve wracking than like the thirds. Because the third I'm just gonna duke it out.
Yeah,
Um,
you're like you're actually thinking on the second attempt still.
yeah, yeah. But typically I changed this a little bit. I've never really gotten hyped up, but I used to do like salts, maybe like listen to like music, stuff like that. I've actually never listened to music on meet day. I don't even
Me
bring
neither.
headphones. People think I'm a freak for that. But I just sit there. I talk to people. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I've typically for myself, I'm actually pretty calm. I found that just works best. I used to be calm and use salts, but I found the salts just make me rush my setup. So I just found being calm is best.
Yeah, and I think especially for like, you talk about this with like your wedging on deadlift, where like you've prioritized a little bit more of that consistency and like less of like being like as explosive. Can you
Yeah,
sort of talk a little bit more about that when it comes to like that, technical execution, maybe how that's changed over time?
yeah. So I used to be always like super super fast off the ground, and then it could fly to my knees and I could fail at lockout. Um, and it was just something where I had the the most difficult time like committing to doing a slower wedge and smaller wedge, and eventually I just finally got myself to commit to it. Um, and it's just way more consistent. And for like any of my athletes that I notice like just flies off the ground and they're inconsistent at lockout, I always just tell them like we should try a minimalistic wedge. Now, if it's something where someone's like it's really difficult off the floor, I mean, there's a few things you can maybe bring the stance in, bring the toe angle in. But if it's still just super, super difficult off the ground and have a smooth lockout, then doing like that larger wedge, bringing a little bit more momentum into it could have some benefit.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always kind of just been that lifter that like, and like I do think you do get some benefit like if you can be more aggressive. Like this goes with like squat, into the hole, or bench press, like like onto your chest, or deadlift. But it's all within that ability to maintain position and execution. Um, and I think lots of times like too, like it's just understanding like with any deadlift too, like it's a whole game of like patience off that floor. Like if you freak out when it feels heavy and it's not breaking immediately, like you're gonna miss it at your knees. Um, I think it's all about finding that happy medium where like you feel strong, confident, like off the floor, um, but you also feel like you're in position consistently. Because if you, especially like a sumo deadlift, it's just so much more technical than like a conventional. Conventional, you can get away with like gripping and ripping like pretty much okay. Sumo, you can't really do that. And like I really just switched to sumo 2 weeks ago on my primary days, and like I was like, oh, this is way different than like conventional, like
And
how I have to like tension.
you pull on a deadlift bar too, right?
Yeah,
So probably even more room for or less room for error.
yeah, that's one thing that people don't. I have you said that because deadlift bars are like more technical, especially the way it like does get heavier.
Yeah.
Especially like how you have to like wedge in, how much more patience you have to have off the floor.
It, you have to make it really smooth off the floor. Um, I don't coach anyone on a deadlift bar, but just I mean through common sense, looking at people, and just other things I've heard, you have to make it really, really smooth off the floor.
I think a big thing is setting up closer to the bar too than you think you have to, because of that. how much it bends upwards, it's going to drift back it's going to drift back into your body a lot if you're further away from the bar. Whereas I feel like on a stiff bar, I see people typically set away a little bit further away from the barbell. Also, like how you have to grip it, like you have to grip it more deep down in your palm than you do on a stiff bar, just because of how much it bends.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever want to pull on a deadlift bar.
Yeah, it's
Rough.
if you like your hands, it's a good idea to get not to. But I wanted to get into secondary day programming. I didn't tell you about this in the DM, so I just was thinking about it. In regards to secondary day programming, or basically like priming your primary days, what are some things that you try to set up for your lifters, like, or you're thinking about on that day going into your, their primary?
I'd say the secondary day squat, probably the most difficult one to figure out. Secondary deadlifts usually aren't that difficult. Bench, if they're benching, I have bench or people on 3 and 4 days a week bench. I don't have anyone on 5. I actually don't have anyone on 3 times a week squat either. So I haven't had anyone who's needed it. I haven't had anyone with just like super freak squat leverages that can just handle a bunch. Well, I do have a few, but they just haven't needed it. They're progressing with 2. But say secondary day squats are definitely the most difficult to figure out, with just intensity, how much volume they need. But how do I figure that out? Just ask them how they feel on the primary. Like, of course, there's like early in the block, if there's someone who utilizes the bigger jumps, they might feel detrained. But just how they're feeling on the week 3, on the week 4. Is the weight feeling heavy on their back? Is the weight feeling good on their back, but maybe they're just a little bit tired? They're doing too much. Um, so.
Yeah, so like, I would agree with you with like squats probably being the most complicated one, especially because like I have experimented with having like a heavier top set, for example, and I do feel like feel a little bit stronger, and it's like some ways, but my back feels tired, and like it doesn't like ever feel really fresh. And also bleeds into my deadlift a bit more. So for me, like having like more volume, like 6 to 8s, just three sets, just it's all I need, and then just ascending too. So I get like a little bit higher average intensity, but like I don't respond very well to like straight sets. I think deadlift programming, just from like what I've experienced on secondary days, like it doesn't need to be very heavy at all. Like just kind of just like
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
pretty speedy. Like this is like when like the conjugate method works well, is like when it's just light on that secondary day.
yeah. That's what my secondary deadlifts for pretty much everyone are pretty light. I'll have some people who they'll have like a pause single, um, just if I want them to have a little bit more practice, but then the back downs will be super super light.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but typically it's like a top set, and then usually no more than 2 sets of back downs. If someone just has like really really good leverages, it might be 3 sets of back downs. Um, and then sometimes I'll do ascending sets for deadlifts if people can handle a bit more. And then I'll also give it similar to like the programming I have myself. I'm not copying, but if someone's like a stronger lifter and they just don't need much, I may even just do like a 3 by 3 or something was like super light.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things with like secondary programming too with that is like once you kind of find like what works for them, like not changing it too much, like keeping it like very
Yeah.
similar. Like was like I used to do like a pretty linear like periodization downwards, and I would just go like I find like, oh, 7s or 8s. So I would just go back and forth like between that, or 3s and 4s. So something like that. If they were just responding well to that, because I don't want to change the average intensity too much. And I find
Yeah, that
especially
can
with deadlift, like as you go down like lower, especially like I feel like a bench press does respond a little bit better to that linear periodization where you go heavier and heavier and heavier. But I think that with squat and deadlift, there's a very specific range of intensities people adapt well to. If you go out of that, it's hard to manage.
yeah, that can apply to everything, I feel like too. Um yeah, that can apply to everything. Like a strategy I'll come and do, this is like more programming in general, is like I'll give someone on their secondary day, on a squat, like a top set of 5, and then the next block will be like a top set of 4, top set of 3. I know that's like nothing groundbreaking. A bunch of coaches do that. Um, but a lot of times I won't let that get down to like a top set of 2 or a top set of 1, because then it's like then you're doing a single on your primary day and a single on your secondary day. What are we doing? Um, But for some people, like you can let it get all the way down to like a 2. So it depends. I feel like that's like the classic coach answer. It's like it always just depends. Like it might look a little bit unusual, but does it work? Do you know why it works? Are they able to stay healthy? Are they able to progress?
Yeah, I think the whole like staying healthy part of this is a huge part, especially as you start to get stronger. And I think this is where just managing that fatigue becomes more and more imperative because like strength training is something where like you want there's going to be a level of fatigue there, but like you should feel relatively like good, especially on your primary days when they come around. And I think that there are some programming methods like just fully putting it out there, like the strength guys are pretty common for putting lots of volume out there and their athletes feeling pretty poorly a lot of the time. And I think that as you get stronger and stronger and stronger, like one of the things that my coach Eric talked about was like, well, if you're adding like, just 10 kilos onto your squat, your deadlift, like that's a volume increase in and of itself. And sometimes that's enough to like negate not needing an extra set or even needing to go down a set to help manage that fatigue. I know that Marcellus made a video on saying how your secondary days actually got you kind of gotten lighter over time because that's what you need to
Yeah.
like actually feel good in your primaries because they're that much more stimulating.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the early in the podcast, but a lot of like my programming strategies, a lot of things I learned is from Marcellus. I'm not claiming on inventing this. Um, but a lot of the stuff I've learned is from him and just being able to recognize trends in my own training, apply it to other people. So I just want to say that. So
Well,
a
no,
lot of the thing, a
that's
lot of the a lot
yeah,
of the things I've said is probably similar to things you've said. But I still am able to take them, apply it to other people, and make them progress. So
right. And like I think any coach has that influence because the reality with powerlifting programming is like there's no book on how to do it. You need to just have experience and have a coach that's qualified. And I've learned a lot from my coach, for example, like problem solving, asking him questions under check-ins and whatever. And I think that's a really important part of just like coaching and just being a lifter is like asking your coaches questions and trying to understand like what you're doing and just being a good communicator and saying this is how I'm feeling, this is why it's probably happening, and reducing it down because like as a coach it's so much more easy to like actually make changes and solve the problem if like your athlete is good at communicating. Some athletes just want to go in and just fill out the sheet and just not really give you that much feedback, and that's fine, but most programming changes are just going to be based on you know intuition instead of like actual auto regulation because I always frame coaching as it's high level auto regulation. So I don't want my athletes really thinking much more besides is if it's the right weight or not in training. And it's my job to manage that stress
yeah,
that they're performing.
yeah. And back to that the secondary topic that I kind of interrupted you
Mm-hmm.
about the Marcellus thing. Yeah, that was actually got weaker. And it was intentionally that happened because those are a programmed range. So he programmed the range, and it was just something where um, after nationals, well, my training's still going well, but after nationals, my training was just going so well that I was hitting like these PRs every block. Um, so I was just doing more with like my top end sets that we didn't need to do that on the secondary days. And he almost did that, or not almost, but he did that pretty much as like a precautionary measure. Where I feel like a lot of coaches they'll wait until it becomes a problem. He actually did that as a precautionary measure, just because he saw like okay, like he's doing more on the primary days. He's stronger, so we need to take away somewhere else.
Also, like with deadlift going up too, like that is, also going to impact things with the crosstalk between squat and deadlift fatigue, and if those are both going up too. Like managing that becomes really, really important. I think this goes to show, like Marcellus' experience working with people are getting to your levels of strength, and I think that's important with coaches too. Is like, do they coach? Do you, like when you're looking at them, like do they coach lifters like you? Do they have some experience with that? Because if you're like their first like 52-kilo girl, they could probably figure it out, but it's going to take a little bit more time than somebody who has experience working with that type of individual.
Yeah, I definitely want to coach more girls because I do coach two currently. They're both doing well, um, but neither of them are like I don't want to say you're typical, but like both of them I have them on 3 days a week bench. I don't have them on like any crazy volume or anything. So definitely be cool to coach more girls and be able to just to learn and practice more.
Yeah. But it's definitely a lot different working with them. I guess is going over bench press then. You've had pretty consistent bench press progress, right? With Marcellus.
Yeah, it's definitely been the slowest, but I would say it's pretty consistent. I mean, I actually took a dip at nationals, then it came back up for this most recent meet, but I would say it's trending like 2.5 kg every 6 months or so, which is all I can really ask.
Hmm.
Bench just gets difficult.
Yeah, so like I guess going off that is I think this is like it's always a problem in child for like most powerlifters. What are some
Yeah.
programming strategies that you think really help out with like bench press and maybe just some technique things you think most people miss?
Um, I can actually say for myself something we did um, is yeah, we actually, and this is going to sound kind of backwards, we actually took out a lot of like pressing accessories because for myself, it's more so like an upper body health thing where I have like, I don't want to blame imbalances because honestly, on like squat and deadlift, I don't like if there's a little bit of hip shoot or if one foot's a little bit uneven, I'm not too worried. Um, but with bench, my left side leg is behind significantly. And we noticed if I did accessories and pushed them pretty hard, that it would make it even worse. So we took out like a lot of accessories, just because I have like the muscle mass built up. If it's someone where they still need to build a lot of muscle mass, but I have the muscle mass built up, and we took out a lot of accessories, a lot of pushing accessories, and we just really only have weighted dips in there, and that helped bench show up a bit better.
Hmm.
So I know that one sounds a bit backwards. It's actually taking out accessories, because usually I'm pretty accessory heavy. I'd rather have people, well, not rather, but go lighter compared to most coaches on like the big lifts, and then push the accessories. I will say bench as a whole is just like the lift programming wise. If I were to choose one that I'm like the worst at, I would definitely I want to improve like my bench programming skills. Um, just learn more things.
I think so. Something I've noticed is that I think a lot of it has to do with range of motion because something that I've learned the hard way with myself and with some of my more lanky lifters is that if you do really high average intensity, like how bench quote unquote should be trained, that tends to lead to aches and pains. Like I've learned that I have to keep my average intensity pretty similar to squat and deadlift. I can handle like a couple of top sets per week, but the bulk of my volume comes from like accessories in terms of like that intensity that I get in terms of the stimulus and then my back down work and just still practice. And then I still think like frequency is something of those things that is very independently that drives bench progress. Like, and there's very few powerlifters you'll find who are making great progress on 2 times a week. Very few, especially like
Yeah,
raw. And so frequencies, typically has to be 3 times a week. And then with somebody gets like, if they're better built for bench press, they're more technically driven, et cetera, like they can handle a little bit more frequency. This is something I was talking with Aiden Rader though about because he was telling that he's gotten a lot more benefit out of his bench press recently from doing less of like that really heavy technique driven bench press that he can do and more of like medium grip, more muscle focus. He's like, yeah, I've just been like, I feel healthier and like, I just feel like I'm better able to make progress. So I think that's also something that you can play around with is like the technique on bench press that you are using. If that is something that is holding you back, especially because like for myself, like that's something I had to work on, and I'm sure for you too, it's changes as you get stronger a little bit.
yeah. I'll say another thing is for myself and for all lifters, and you can even say for all lifts, is once you are making that progress and weight is feeling good, to not get greedy. Because that's something bench health has been like up and down the past 2 years for me. I'm generally pretty healthy on the other lifts, but just upper body health has been kind of a question mark. Not where it's like to the extent where I just like can't lift, but to the extent where it's like, okay, it's hard to progress this lift. And I feel like the problem I get is I'll have like this month or two streak where it's feeling really, really good. I'm PRing, and then I get a little bit too greedy, and then a little setback, and then build myself back up, and feel good for another month or two. Um, I'll say just applying that to all three lifts. Because I know one of the questions you had about was injury prone lifters. I'd say one thing for them is just not getting too greedy. Just taking those small wins, resetting, building back up.
Yeah, I definitely think like that volume and like load progression. Like you think about it, like fast progress is 2.5 kilos on your squat and on your deadlift. and 1.25 on your bench per month. And so you don't really need to get that greedy. I know that you've always mentioned like in your triples box, you mentioned that this on your story, like, oh, it's 5 pounds heavier. That's my crazy progress. Like every time I come back to like triples, every time I come back to doubles, it's I aim for 5 pounds heavier. And I think that is like, even if you feel better, like if you feel good, but you're able to consistently add that, like you're just going to have so much momentum, feel better in training. And I also think like coming down to like expectations for like a meet, like understanding like how long, how much progress you can probably make, like between meet to meet as a certain weight class and progression, especially like as advanced that you are getting, is slower than you think.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Is like for other lifters, sometimes they just don't feel the greatest after meets. They feel a little bit dull. It's like we don't need a PR the first block back. I mean, by all means, if you feel good, weight's moving good, go for it. But like myself right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to go for triples PRs this block. We'll see. Like my week 3 is going to be a big indicator. But if it's not there, I probably won't take it. And then by the time I do just for myself, I do like triples, doubles, singles. Um, and then I might just go to the doubles block and try to PR there. Um, that's another thing is just if it's not there, not taking it. Um, and for some lifters where it's like maybe they don't have a meet and they don't have a meet in plan, so the macro cycle is a little bit more like I can adjust it a bit more. We could just run back to triples block and do it again.
Right. Yeah, I think periodizing that peak intensity can also help out with that. Like I always for my lifters, I just like tell them like we're going up to like very light weights, just doing volume on that block back, just trying to get back that momentum. And usually they feel pretty good by that second block rolls around. And they're in like PR setting territory, and they're not increasing their chronic workload ratio super fast. Because that's actually one of the times I do see injuries pop up the most is like after a meet. The lifters might feel really fresh or whatever, or they feel detrained or still trying to like force things, and then they get hurt.
Yeah, I'd say another thing too is when lifters are PRing, we don't need a PR every day. Um, it's fine if even certain days go backwards. Because I had one lifter who he doubled his squat max. He like hit like a 10 kilogram bench PR, and like doubled over his deadlift. So a bit newer of a lifter who's able to like make that kind of crazy progress. And then he went into like the secondary days in his block, and he just like felt terrible. And he took it pretty easy, which is what he should do. But he was kind of bummed about it. I was like, dude, like go back 3 days and look what happens. Like it's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's also, again, just auto regulating based on like how you feel, because that whole point of secondary days, auto regulate that so that secondary day or the primary day feels good. If you feel beat up, like, and look back at what you did, it's like, oh, well, there we go. So, want to thank you for coming on, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. If people want to follow you or hire you for coaching, where should they head?
So my Instagram is Lucky Lifts, and then I have a form in my bio for coaching.
Cool. I'll make
If they have,
sure I go ahead.
if they have any questions or anything, they can always DM me.
Awesome. I'll make sure I include all those details in the description below. And thank you guys for listening. Talk to you guys in the next episode.